I do not know whether the gods are faces that we give to that which is faceless in order to comprehend it and be close to it as human beings. If they are manifestations of distinct powers arising from an unknowable immensity or supreme reality or a oneness. If they are mediators or messengers between us and the God who is beyond comprehension. If they are aspects of nature and the world personified. If they are archetypes or forces of consciousness both within and without man. Or if they are at the highest human expression of being beyond mortality. Perhaps they are a combination of all of the above. What I do know is that the gods are mysteries, and that we as human beings are ultimately drawn to them. And I know that they respond if one calls out to them. In times when the shrouds between worlds are temporarily unveiled, when our universe expands, they make themselves manifest. For this to happen, one has to live poetically and live strongly. One has to live a life of great deeds, of overcoming, a life worthy of divine attention. One has to boldly face great sorrow and greater joy, for the gods have no interest in dull normalcy. Infinite divinities await, hidden within man himself, which is always the place of the final pilgrimage. The godlight becomes living reality when dreams intersect with the waking world. These are knife-edge moments when the mythic cuts through the temporal to reveal the timeless, where the spirit is elevated to its superior states, where the poetic takes flight over the rational. In moments such as these, the gods awaken and reclaim their seat in the soul. We can hear them when we call out for them, in the crash of thunder and in the whisper of rustling leaves, in the creak of frosted towering evergreens and in the roar of waves, in the solemn song of eternal dawn and in the ecstatic cries of battle and love. And we wait for the furor of their return. Burn, baby, burn. The gods are coming.
Free your mind.
What is he doing?
He's beginning to believe.
Welcome to Aeon Byte. Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it is. It just is. I hope you enjoyed that intro from my short clip, Who Are the Gods, which I always loved, and I think it's spot on. And we're going to find out who a certain goddess is today, a very important goddess, and one I think the world needs more than ever today, as we will discuss, and I have shared my ideas why before. My name is Miguel Connor, and I am so glad to see you on this Mercury Day, this day of Hermes, this day of psychopomps, this day of messengers. And today I am very excited to be joined by Cyndi Brannen to discuss a book I really enjoy, Entering Hecate's Cauldron, Spells, Spirits, Rites, and Rituals. And yes, good book. Cyndi, thank you very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time and gnosis.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I am too, very much. And with us too, always my psychopomp on these adventures, and that is Graham Pong. Graham, how are you doing today?
Oh, not too bad. Probably a little more psycho than pomp today. But
it's only the middle of the week, yeah.
Yeah, my goal is to figure out how I cannot get turned into an animal for just too long.
There you go. There you go. Such is the way of the world, and who are the gods? I see already a good crowd going in the chat. Good to see everybody. Always enjoyed your interaction. As always, if you do have a question for Cyndi, please super chat them so that Graham can separate them and, isolate your question and answer your question too. And of course, it always helps when you support Aeon Byte in any way you can. You know the bromide, like, subscribe, and so forth. So, but let's get started. Cyndi, how really briefly? I want to say, how did you encounter Hecate? But when did she choose you? Like I say, the gods choose us. We talked before how Artemis and Santa Muerte picked me. I had no choice. When did Hecate choose you?
Oh, she chose me. It was a really, really long time ago, probably 18 or so years ago now. And I've often said that I wish I had a more spiritual or witchy story. But how it all came to be was that I was at a crossroads in my life. My marriage had ended. My career that I had worked so hard for I knew it was falling apart. Like I was falling apart in it. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it was going well on the surface, but underneath I was kind of dying inside. And so I had two children at the time. And as is the case when you have a career and a house and kids and all the things, I was folding laundry really late at night one night in the basement. So hail Cathonia. Um,
Yeah.
and out of the blue, I just heard this voice in my head that said, "It's time." And I knew it was Hecate. Now, I had been involved with the goddesses at this point since I was a teenager. So it
Mm,
wasn't like I didn't know who she was. I hadn't been seeking Hecate actively in any way. Do you know what I'm saying?
right.
I had been a devotee of Artemis since I discovered her when I was like 15. She'll always be, she was my first. And there's many connections between Hecate and Artemis, of course. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, that's how it all gets started. And I answered the call. I think that's the key. It felt real to me. I did have some questions. I am a super Gemini, so I always have questions.
Always.
I had some questions about my own experience. And then I had maybe a year or so later, I had what I call a come to Hecate moment when I was just sitting outside the house. Again, not a high ritual, no ceremony, no
Right.
meditation. I was just sitting outside the house looking at kind of I don't even know how to describe this, the corner of the house, where the house meets the world,
Right.
that kind of liminal zone.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the built structure of the house, and then, the nature, like the
Right.
rose bushes and the juniper, and I was looking, just like allowing myself to absorb that energy. And then I said, you know what? I'm done with the questioning. This feels right and true and beautiful and lights me up. And I'm just going to go. I'm just going to go with it and start having these Gemini, dualistic conversations about the nature of all of this and just follow those torches. And here we are today.
Awesome. Yes. And of course, all the themes were there, like you said, the crossroads, the underworld, the liminal spaces. The drama was unfolding with you, even though it seemed it was in mundane settings, but it was all there. Hecate was changing reality around you.
Definitely.
And for the audience, it should be noted, this is actually the third of a trilogy, right? You
Mhm.
also wrote Entering Hecate's Garden, Entering Hecate's Cave, and then you have the book Keeping Her Keys, right? So this is she's kept you busy. Let's put it that way. This
She has
ain't your
kept me
first
busy.
rodeo. Yeah, and I really enjoyed the book. In fact, for the audience, I was actually surprised because we do a ton of Jung. We've done a lot of Hecate shows, but obviously we do about 30 shows on Jung. I had no idea that he had written about her. I knew about James Hillman, but you write in your book that he wrote in his essay Science and Mythology, co-authored by C. Karenni. So even Jung uses Hecate. And how did you use her? What archetype, with Jung, what archetype does she represent?
That's such a great question. And I think that's where, are we going to go in deep here and start talking about depth psychology?
Yeah, we
Um,
love to geek out here about the audience. That's their bread and butter.
okay. So I believe that James Hillman must have read that essay by Jung and Karenni. And maybe it was just gnosis, and he kind of caught the same wavelength. Jung writes about different goddess archetypes in different papers and so on, like he certainly did, but he rarely mentioned Hekate. And so this, again, I'm curious by nature. So this made me curious. Does he ever mention her? And years ago, I was working with a mythologist and folklorist, and we did a deep dive into that paper. And I haven't read that paper for years now, but he does mention her. And I think I would say it's in the Hillmanian kind of manner, that she is like the dark underworld, the shadow self. I'm going to say I do believe he positioned her as an intermediary, like, a spiritual intermediary, the crossroads, of course. And then, Hillman, of course, picks up on this in The Dream in the Underworld, and really fleshes Hekate out. And here's where it got interesting for me is I was trying to map this out. I was like, okay, so generally in psychology, even the depth psychologists who kind of veer into the goddesses, or maybe not just psychologists, but also like psychiatrists like Jean Shinoda Boland, the ones who come at this from a background not dissimilar to mine.
Right.
And they get into goddesses. Why are they all ignoring Hekate? Like, what is up with this? So I was on this mission to kind of find sources. So ran into Hillman, and I was like, yes, okay. And then all of his other work, I'm like, this is very Hekatean. This is psychopomp work. This is not trying to be rational, and kind of, really connected to Hillman. Went back to a lot of this stuff on Jung that I already knew and went there. But this is, for me, the thing that gets interesting. So Hillman had a very good friend. Well, he's still alive, Thomas More, who used to be a monk. You know who Thomas More is.
Oh, yeah.
And then he had written this book called The Dark Nights of the Soul. And in that book, there are multiple, like there's a whole chapter on Hekate. Hekate is all through this book. And I had read this book back in the day because this book actually, this is like way back in the day when it first came out. He was one of Oprah's favorites when Oprah had her daytime. That is the first time I had heard of that book. But then I went back to it, like say maybe 10-ish, years ago, reread it because I was trying, following these threads. And I thought, that's really interesting that Thomas More was bringing Hekate to this book that was, I don't know if you remember, this book was incredibly popular when it came out because it had Oprah's endorsement, right?
Yeah.
And then when I discovered that he was really, really close to James Hillman, who was like this, erudite, super influential, but not exactly selling 5 million copies of a book, right? And that they were really close, and that they had both kind of percolated these ideas about Hekate as a healer of, what we could call like shadow issues.
That makes sense. Yeah, perfect for that, for sure. And the other question I had for you, and again, this is a little geeking out, the idea, and this is something that I had conversations with Sorita de Este a lot, and I would say it seems that most of the modern witch world doesn't want to see Hekate as an aspect, I think, which is very important, and that's of the trickster. When you look at her as a trickster, she is blow by blow, a part of the trickster archetype, from the psychopomp, the helper, the bringer, on the liminal spaces. Where does the trickster hang out? Always at the crossroads, right? Whether, I have this book on Elvis with Robert Johnson and others, and the African animist devil is always at the crossroads. So it seems, do you think she's been overlooked as a trickster? And I say because as a world, as a culture, we are going into a transition. Nobody knows what America is going to be on the other side, or Europe, even Asia is going. The trickster is really sometimes the most important archetype. Even Jung said the UFO was a trickster in the 50s when America came out of World War II. What do you think of these ideas?
I think, of course, The psychopomp is the trickster, the healer, the great teacher. They Hekatean specifically, like in my own personal experience, what I've seen over the years, and kind of like broad view of history and literature and art about her, she abides at the crossroads, and there is a tricky aspect to her because, she is personally very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, wherever you look for Hekate, she's at the crossroads, and at the same time, she's not going to, like, I guess in terms of personal encounters, she's not going to take your hand and solve your problems for you, right? Like,
No.
she's going to, like, I use the metaphor, like, offer you a key, shine her torch, but it's up to you to figure, to do the thing. Like, she is always going to be tricky.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I avoid using the word like trickster because there is kind of a connotation about what a trickster spirit is kind of in the main witch world these days.
Right.
It's interesting, like, we're recording this on Mercury's day. Mercury is still retrograde.
Yeah.
We're having, like, what is it this weekend? There's all Uranus just moved into Gemini. Like, there's a lot of Mercury floating around with us right now.
Yeah.
And then, of course, like, we're having an Aquarius full moon. So it's like Mercury meets Uranus. It's like we are in the era of the trickster energy. And, Hekate, we may want Hekate to kind of be this source of succor and stability. And I think she is. But I also think she scares the life into us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's not here to placate us and tell us life is wonderful and we're all living in happy fields of unicorns. That's not who she is energetically. And I think part of why she has become so, I don't really like the word popular, but I'll say, but part of why she's so popular today is that even if consciously we might be aversive to trickster energy, but subconsciously, linking us back to Hillman, subconsciously, there's, some deeper part of us that knows we need that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, we're just, we've entered this Pluto and Aquarius era where who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And a goddess who says, yeah, like, we're all at the crossroads together. There's cosmic order and cosmic flow, and you're caught up in it. So, I can help, but it's really up to you to show up in this cosmic, hermetic situation we all find ourselves living in these days.
Oh, yes. And I think she's wonderful for these things because she's a great figure for shadow work, which we all need. And I think, like any trickster, she's telling you, look, you have one choice, change. Now, people, and I'm guilty of this, Cyndi. I want to change. But most of the time, I just want my broken toys mend and I want things to be okay. But change, which is what Hecate and Hermes and the coyotes say, that's hard. But it's their warning, like, you can change one way or you can change going insane, or, we are going to change and I am going to help you. So in that way, she is a very useful, but like you said, her warning is serious. We got to change or else you'll be left behind.
Yeah, we have to change. And, I was just thinking about what you were just saying, the whole thing of, like, like, the choice is offered. Psychopomps and tricksters offer us a choice, right? There's always a choice. If you look at, like, mythology and folklore,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, it's up to us to choose wisely. And sometimes we make really dumbass mistakes.
Sometimes, yeah. More often than not.
Multiple times a day. But it's
right.
That's where the wisdom comes from. And if we're going to survive the things that are coming on the global level, like, we need to develop some skills. We need wisdom. We need to be able to go to a deeper center that says I can survive this, right?
Exactly. And that's where the trickster is useful. And at the same time, as you write in your book, she can also be viewed. I love this day when we're actually more sophisticated. It's no longer about, this sort of caricature time where Zeus, thunder, Aphrodite, love. We're seeing that these gods are multifaceted, and they were always, the ancients saw them as multifaceted. We're the ones who sort of brought them down to simplistic things. So she could also be the anima mundi, right? She is the great mother. And even yourself, we talked about the connections of Artemis and Hecate. Obviously, Hecate came from Anatolia. Artemis in Anatolia was not the same Artemis as the Greco-Roman world. She was seen as also the great mother, Hecate, Cybele. So she really is part of this primordial divine feminine power, right? This animating principle of the entire universe.
I think so. And I think that also maps onto like shadow work and trickery. It's not a flatline great mother. It's not like a stained glass benevolent Mother Mary, holding the beatific Jesus. Like, this is the great mother. She's great. She's all things. And we've really, really flatlined the gods in our Western world, that they're only allowed to have certain powers and they can only do certain things. And, and we all have to do certain things or else they'll smite us down.
Right.
And, and I think stepping back and trying to see Hecate as anima mundi, the cosmic world soul, which the main source of this comes from a collection of ancient fragments that are called the Chaldean oracles. But also one of my favorite ancient philosopher, theurgist, Proclus, had thoughts on this as well. And something I've been thinking about a lot is that Hecate most likely, her origins could have been in Anatolia, in Caria, which is modern day Turkey. But also, she's referenced as Persian in many sources. And I've been thinking about this because I'm in the thick of something I do this time of the year every year. Is I do like a personal intense devotional cycle. And this year I'm taking like a different, I'll say like lesser known or aspect of Hecate I haven't explored before, and doing things personally, through creativity, but also like either looking at new research or going back to research I've kind of collected. And this idea of her being called Persian. And then I was making connections yesterday. I wrote a book on botanical witchcraft called Hecate's Garden. And in it, I specifically say that my source of inspiration for this was the story of Jason and his Argonauts.
Right.
And in one version of it, this garden that they go to get the golden fleece, it's called by the author, and I forget which version now, but one of them calls it Hecate's Garden, or the translator does. It goes back and forth. There's arguments about whether it's Artemis's garden or Hecate's garden. But if we go with the idea that it was Hecate's Garden, and we know, and I was looking at new evidence for this, we know like there is historical evidence that the story of Jason had like real life origins in modern day Georgia or ancient Colchis, right?
Yeah.
So then if we think, okay, so Hecate's Garden was in ancient Colchis, modern day Georgia. And we know that versions of this story, they date back like hundreds of years at least before the historical, documents that we have start to tell the story. And then she's referenced as Persian in different places. And then perhaps she had already been in Colchis. So that predates like kind of her big center of worship in Lagina near the town of Strakonikeia in modern Western Turkey, where they're doing a lot of archaeology right now. So, and then I was looking at this even older image and I'm sorry, I don't have the name of the paper like right at the top of my head, but there's an academic paper that says that there's this amphora and there's this goddess on it with dogs and fishes.
Mm.
And the author posits that that could have been an early depiction of Hekate.
Oh.
And then I got me thinking, because there's swastikas on it, which I know is so problematic, right? But
Back then.
swastikas are an ancient symbol. But we also know that they came even further from the east, right? And then if we look at Hecate's name may mean one from afar, or the far darting or far seeing one. And her whole, like in the Titanomachy, you know, she is a Titan, but she's an outsider even among the Titans, right? Like,
Right.
because she sides with the Olympians. So I'm thinking that, I mean, it could well be that Hecate's trail, she really is the far seeing or far darting one, because she came from much farther to the east than what we've thought of. But does that even really matter? Because like you say, if we look at like Cybele, Artemis of Ephesus, even Isis, if we want to go in that direction.
Yeah, Ashira,
These great mother figures in different regions, we know they were called different things, but they had many, many of the similar attributes.
No, I agree, and and agreed 100%. I think you're spot on, because my friend Jason wrote a book, Iranian Leviathan. He's a Persian scholar, and he traces, yes, all these goddess Artemis, Medea. I know you got in trouble in your blog for saying Medea is a goddess, but she's kind of reached that level. But trace them back to these ancient Persian goddesses like Satana or the Gorgons. The Greeks demoted the Gorgons, but to the Persians, the Gorgons were the great serpentine supreme goddesses, just like the serpent is associated with Ashira and Sophia and so many other deities. So I think you're right that these were very ancient gods, maybe the Ashuras of the Hindus, or the Aryans, the original Aryans, and with Mithras and all that. And then it just sort of, moved on to the puny little Westerners. We got that stuff. You know what I mean? And we demoted some of them. We said, we got to bring them down a few notches.
Yeah, well, even what they did to Medea, I think the Medea is a good parable, a good example, right?
Yeah.
Of perhaps how the Greeks and then the Romans treated not just the goddesses, but a lot of the foreign imports that they brought in. Because Medea is revered as a hero in modern day Georgia.
Yeah, that's where she left. She ended up in the Persian Empire, right?
Right. Well, but she came from there too. She came from Colchis, right? So she came from there. And then you have to think if how the Greeks and then later the Romans, if how they were relating to these figures, these spirits that they were importing, this kind of, I don't know how to call it, like this kind of love hate, like, oh, they're so scary and bad and evil, but at the same time they're super powerful and wonderful. And then you can see parallels in how some people relate to even newcomers today. Like I know in the US there's been all this backlash against immigration, and it's like we still kind of have this struggle that the ancient Greeks were having too. It's like, oh yeah, we love people from different cultures because they have so many wonderful things they can give us, and at the same time you better look, people have a lot of stereotypes. So I don't think the Greeks were that different from us, and I don't think how they kind of transposed these older deities was really that different either.
Yeah, humans are humans,
right? We haven't really changed.
No, even though the trickster says things would be much better if you just damn change. And even the Gnostics aren't that different, because as you probably know, when you read the Pistis Sophia, the Gnostic text, Hekate gets demoted even more. There's this place called the Mids, is like even worse than hell, and she and Typhon are stranded in there as these two supreme archons. Now, the argument is that Pistis Sophia was written 4th, 5th century, so we've got this late stage Gnosticism. They're no longer doing Egyptian magic or sex. They no longer invoke the pagan gods like the classical Gnostics did, who were more inclusive. They've gone full on Christian with the Roman Empire. So, but it's still interesting that it would be the two threats that these Gnostics had would be Hecate and Typhon.
That's really interesting. And I think also in Eusebius, what is his name? Eusebius, his preparation.
Yeah, I pronounce it differently. Yeah.
His Preparatio Evangelica, which is very similar in tone to the Pistis Sophia, if maybe not as sophisticated as the Pistis Sophia, but it's the same thing. It's like, ooh, Hecate, she's so bad. We've got to really make sure we give her a big treatment. It's kind of like some weird Catholic monk fixation on like a powerful, dangerous woman, right? It's like, oh, you can't, you know what I mean? It's like, she is so bad because you know what? We can't control her.
Yeah, and I think that was on purpose because Medea and Hecate really are the great symbols of the pharmakia, which is the woman's ability to create herbs, poisons, medicines, and it makes her as formidable as a warrior, right? Medea can take down as many men as Achilles, but she uses the pharmakia to do that, and this was an integral part to ancient traditions, but the solar gods came in and the left brain civilization. So don't you think they just had to get rid of the pharmakia and the woman's ability to connect with nature? And that manifests supremely with Medea and Hecate, right? We get those two out of the way, we can control women.
Yeah, I do think so. And, taking pharmakia or pharmakeia away from like as a sacred practice, like as a healing practice, and just kind of thinking about like how the Romans, it started with the Greeks, but the Romans even amplified it more about this kind of this practice of magic that was also healing, but also, like you said, like, a woman armed with poison is just as deadly as a battalion.
Right.
And then it just became more solar, more masculine, and all of these aspects became so like pilloried. And Medea's name, doesn't it mean like the wise one or the founder of cities or something?
Good question.
I'm
I'd have
trying
to
to
look at
remember.
etymology. She's always been one of my female heroes. I don't know, in all mythology. And I like it. I agree with you. And like you said, the original story, she doesn't kill her children. She just gets the hell out of Dodge.
Right. But, the Greeks needed to take the foreign powerful woman and make her bad. So what's the worst thing a woman could do? Right?
Infanticide, yeah. For sure. But the truth is coming out. Graham, do you have a question or any question from the audience, or what do you think so far?
Oh no, I've been very much enjoying it. I was going to sit there and say the only constant is change, and people try to put Hecate in a box, and Hecate doesn't fit well in a box. She's like carrot stick, she's the combination, the giving mother and the devouring mother, both at the same time. And the Hecate's garden would make sense in the Golden Fleece because there's a very, the natural connection between Hecate, and magic, and also Medean magic. The thought occurs to me, my question is, going back even further, what about connections between Hecate and Tiamat as the primordial female goddess? Tag.
Well, that's interesting. I'm not super familiar with Tiamat, so I don't know, Graham or Miguel, if you want to give me like 30 seconds on Tiamat.
Sure. I mean, and I'd say sometimes these images are by modern culture, like Hecate became Hecate, Shakespeare. With me, my introduction was playing Dungeons and Dragons as a teenager, and you get the deities and demigods, and you're like, they describe Hecate as this evil, dark witch. Her alignment is like lawful evil or so, she's there with her dogs topless in the sun. And that's the impression I get as a young teenager, not the way that, Demeter or Persephone is portrayed in Dungeons and Dragons. And the image just gets twisted. It gets simplified too. And Tiamat, of course, was the dragon with 7 heads when I played Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, she's she's great chaos, the chaos mother, where order comes from.
Yeah, no, I was going to sit there and say is I played Dungeons and Dragons, but luckily I was into mythology early on, so I knew Tiamat and Hekate from mythology. Hekate primarily from the Odyssey with Homer was my first impression of it, and then get Tiamat from the original Marduk myth with in Babylonian times. And that's where it comes from, was the idea of Tiamat was the female primordial goddess of the salt water. And Marduk became the king of the gods by becoming the representative and standing up and defeating Tiamat and defeating that one, and thereby doing that one. And this seems to be that Hecate would have that connection to that primordial aspect. That was all. Thanks.
Oh, definitely. Thank you for that refresher on Tiamat. I think this is so interesting because we know that Hekate, by Hesiod in his Theogony and in other places, she's linked directly with the sea.
Mm-hmm.
Inalia is the aspect of her, as a sea goddess. So I think there is definitely that primordial aspect to her. She has the epithet of presbia, which means ancient or elder. So you see it in different, and that comes from the Greek magical papyri, but you see it in other places. And I think also in the Chaldean oracles, and for example, like Proclus's writing on Hekate, you see this coming through, that yes, we can see her as an embodied triple form goddess, and she can be the rotting goddess, she can be the chaos bringer, she can also be the protector, she can be all these things. But if we liberate her from trying to give her a humanoid condition, that she's more like this primordial force, right? That is about both creation and destruction. So I think that links to Tiamat, it links to Ishtar, it links to all of these older stories, right?
Right.
That they have this multifaceted power that we try to, put her in a box, or we try to put her in humanoid form. And, Hecate needed 3 forms just to try to explain, the experience of Hecate. One wasn't enough, because she was so multifaceted, but also, in a practical sense, she was a threshold goddess. So she needed the 3 forms so she could look in all directions. But even that is somewhat primordial, otherworldly, that she can see in all directions at once. She's like the air. You know what I mean? That she sees everything.
Exactly. Yeah. Well said, indeed. And how did the ancients see the crossroads? Maybe for the audience, what exactly is the cross? Again, I've done work on it with my book. I don't know if you've seen the movie that came out recently called Sinners. It also deals with the idea of the crossroads and the devil, and of course other gods appear at the crossroads. But how did the ancients see the crossroads, or how did they get to the crossroads?
So this is really compelling, because I think in our modern life, for many of us, we have a very different view of the crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
So in ancient times, and let's say in the ancient Mediterranean specifically, crossroads were seen as these liminal places between realms, between the living and the dead, between spirits and mortals. And you see this not just in association with beliefs in the ancient Mediterranean, but kind of globally. Crossroads are always about this, right?
Yeah, the Bardo is the Tibetan Bardo.
Yeah. But physically, if we say, like, let's contextualize this. So, let's say, like, we have this belief that crossroads are these places, these portals that connect us to the other side. But also, like, okay, practically, like in the mundane middle world kind of sense, what were crossroads? And, crossroads were often places that were associated with what we might call today, like, where marginalized people would hang out. People who were outcasts of society would be at crossroads. And also travel was very, very dangerous. And this is something that's long fascinated me about Hecate's association with a Thessalian goddess called Enodia or Enodea. Because ancient Thessaly was above Athens, but in that same area. So we're not in the east anymore. We're like on that kind of Greek peninsula. So Enodia was an old goddess. And again, the Greeks imported everything and they imported her. But if you look at the history of her in Thessaly, and this is where I think, because some people will say Hekate clearly came down from the north into Greece. But, and there's some evidence for that, particularly when we start connecting her with this goddess Enodia. So Enodia was a very important goddess in ancient Thessaly, going back before what we think of like classical Greece. And the Greeks kind of imported Hekate, and they had imported ideas about Enodia because of their conquests. And at some point, this Hekate that came from the east, who was perhaps more of a mother goddess figure associated with magic and childbirth, protection of children, spirits, and so on. And then this goddess from the north, who was focused on crossroads, actual roads, all things to do with thresholds. At some point, they kind of really converged, just like Hecate and Artemis did in different areas of the ancient Mediterranean as well. So they converge. And Enodia was that goddess of the journey. But in the ancient world, like, you really, really needed a goddess to help you get from one place to the other. At the time, Enodia is associated with horses. There's different magical coins of Hecate as Enodia with horses on them and so on. So there's a link to Hecate there as well. But, you've got to think, like, horseback riding had only been a thing for a few centuries. Right. And they brought that from the East too, right? Like, it wasn't, the Greeks invented nothing. Maybe a couple of things. So most people were walking from place to place. And it was dangerous. Like, there weren't convenient rest stops. There weren't Starbucks.
Right.
There was no, we think now if the car breaks down on the highway, we can call 911 and get help. Like, none of these things existed. You needed someone to help you to get from one place to the other. And the crossroads were the most dangerous place. I believe also, like, people thought that thieves and so on would hang out at the crossroads because, that's where everybody had to come together. So, like, there was all this business around just how dangerous it was to get from one place to another, right? And I think that's something that we need to take into consideration and not just see the crossroads as this kind of romantic, spooky, spiritual place. Like, these were real people that venerated this goddess and had to get from one place to the other on foot.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and as you write too, she was also, and this one falls under Artemis, but she was also, like you said, she took care of the outsider, those who proper society wouldn't accept, like girls who died before they were wed, women who died in childbirth, poor people who didn't receive proper burials. Hecate was like Artemis, Artemis more with women, but took care of these souls to make sure that they got their due, or what they deserved in the afterlife and so forth.
Mhm. And also in different sorts. So there's a great book if anyone is interested in not just Hecate, but in how the Greeks saw the dead. There's a book called The Restless Dead by the academic Sarah Ellis Johnson
Mm.
that really gets into this in detail. So if you're interested in how the Greeks saw death, but in that book, she has this. She has a great section on Hecate. Well, Hecate is kind of woven through the whole book because to the Greeks, Hecate really was associated with the dead. Like as we move into kind of like classical Greek
Mm.
era, right? Hecate is the dead. She's about getting from one place to another, any kind of transition.
Right.
So childbirth, death, moving from one place to another. That is where she is. She's the spirit of those things. And so in this book, Dr. Johnson writes about, her as like raging among souls of the dead. And I've been meditating on what that means.
Mm.
Like, why would Hecate be raging among the souls of the dead?
Mm.
But then it's almost like what you were saying about if she's accepting the women who died before they were married, or unwed mothers, or just the outcast of society, that she's perhaps, this expression meant she was raging, like to express their sorrow, their
Right.
loss, like that they had been denied a kalos thanatos, right, a good death. And that maybe, because I was like, that's something that's just always kind of fascinated me, but I've never really gone into the research about why they would see her as raging, as opposed to
Right.
kind of being like a calming presence, or just not even emotional. Because like the Greeks weren't super, like they didn't give a lot of emotions to the gods often, right? Like the gods did what the gods did. But so why is she raging? And that just, I've been thinking about that.
Yeah, there must be a reason, because I'm thinking, of course, of the Banshee in Ireland, La Llorona in
Mhm.
Mexico. These spirits who are just screaming for their children, or screaming at the living, or something. They're in some sort of rage. I think Japan has those too. What do
Yeah.
you think, Graham? Does this ring a bell with you and your mythology studies?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I was going to say one of my understandings for the triple goddess. There's so many different ways to take the triple goddess, but one of the ones that's always worked well for me is the idea of it's the various stages of a woman's life.
Mhm.
And it's based off of the menstruation cycle. Her
Mhm.
maidenhood is from the onset where she has her regular cycle, and then the motherhood is when she has the interruptions via pregnancy and childbirth and such, and then the crone stage is sort of the menopause and postmenopause. And that's been always been a good understanding for me. How does that track with you, Cyndi?
Well, this is interesting. So I've been, like, I would say pagan adjacent for almost all of my life. Um, and, ran into grew up in the 80s, 90s, and so on. And so this idea of the triple goddess as maiden, mother, crone was one that was very pervasive during those days. It was kind
Mhm.
of like the norm. If you went to a pagan ritual, this is how you saw the goddess, maiden, mother, crone. Um, and I never liked it, to be honest. Um, it never sat right with me. Maybe coming from, a long-standing association with Artemis, and then getting involved with Persephone to do a lot of self work. After Artemis was kind of like, here's Persephone, because you need to sort out some things. Um, and that's not my
Was
area of expertise. Um, Um, so I didn't really like it. And even in the original edition of the Keeping Her Keys book, I think I'm a little saucy about the MMC model. I've gotten over it a lot since then, and I can understand why people relate to it. And it is a modern invention. Like modern, I mean like late 19th century, early 20th century, like the way we see it now, this modern maiden mother crone. It's not ancient. Like the Greeks did not think that those three heads of Hekate were speaking to three distinct separate phases of a woman's life. Like that is not what they thought when they put her in three forms. Oftentimes those three forms, they had animal heads, right? They didn't even have humanoid heads. They would have animal heads. So I think if it helps people, it's great. But I would also encourage people to maybe go beyond that a little bit. You know, not every woman menstruates, not every woman has children, not every woman goes through menopause, you know, and we're fortunate enough to live in a time, you know, a trickster Hermes era when everyone is free to question and self-define their own gender. And I think that's so beautiful. I mean, Hermes certainly was what we might call non-binary today. And I would argue Hecate had many non-binary aspects too. Many of the epithets that were applied to her were masculine epithets. And that's always kind of made me go, that's interesting. What's going on there? Why did that ancient author choose to use a masculine epithet, right? So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying, I think if it's helpful for someone, great. If it doesn't work for you, then that's fine too. Like this was not ancient Hecate. It was not maiden mother.
I can understand you saying it wasn't ancient Hecate. I don't understand how you can't say that the triple goddess wasn't an ancient construct, given, you know, the Moirai, you know, in the Greeks, the three fates, and the Norns in Norse mythology. It seems, and they very much echo that, you know, maiden mother crone trilogy. Now, I agree with it. A particular goddess may not fit into the triple goddess well, but I think the idea of the triple goddess, I don't understand how you can't say that idea isn't actually ancient. Okay.
Oh, okay. Maybe I wasn't clear, Graham. I meant like the specific way that kind of the modern pagan take on the maiden mother crone. Like that is something, you know, like I'm not saying that there wasn't like the Norns and so on. I'm saying like kind of the version I grew up with in the 80s and 90s that's like a modern kind of compilation, I think I would call it. So just thanks for letting me clarify that.
Yeah, and that's pretty even recent. Yeah, my introduction to this maiden crone thing was Neil Gaiman reading The Sandman in the 90s. I know Gaiman has fallen from grace, but The Sandman just came out, and it's the story of the Furies, the three Roman Furies going to war with Morpheus. And yes, it's young, middle-aged, and an elderly woman. So
yeah, no, that's fair, because like I said, I started reading mythology early on, and I was reading the mythology on the triple goddess and the various different mythologies in the early 70s. So this was before that whole later, you know, the very beginning of the New Age movement. It was before, you know, it had settled in and crystallized into what you're talking about, Cyndi. Tag.
Okay.
Crystallized. Yeah, no pun intended, huh? Yeah, well, we have here a super chat, a quick one. Somebody has a question for you. That's from Maeve. Thank you very much. What's the difference between the first and second edition of Keeping or Keys? And did you use AI to write any of your books? Well, I can answer that one. Yeah, I publish books. They won't allow it, even if you did.
So the difference between the first and second edition was there were some copy editing issues with the first edition that were kind of beyond my control. And I always felt like my books are offerings of my expression to my service to the divine feminine, specifically Hekate, oftentimes. And it felt like it was something that I needed to fix. It was like an offering that wasn't quite what it wanted to be. So I went back on my own volition, didn't get paid to do it. worked with an amazing copy editor, and we completely made everything just flow better, make sure everything is clear, and so on. Can I say something about AI books? Because
Yeah, sure,
this is a pet peeve of mine.
sure.
There are many AI generated books about Hecate today circulating on Amazon.com.
Really?
And many of these, like, yeah, this is a thing. People will take my blog articles or other authors writing, Sarita's writing, like, and
Right.
they'll just kind of give it a treatment and then parcel it up as a book and sell it. And I've had multiple books that have done this over the years. People bring them to my attention. So, I would say if you are interested in Hecate, there's lots of great authors out there, not just me. Like Sarita has some amazing books. Courtney Weber's book is good. Like even some of the Jason Miller books, like that touch upon this. There's lots of great, legitimate authors on Hecate, and a key is if you are looking, like say you're on Amazon and you're looking at this book and it's like $2.99.
Mhm.
Well, that's going to be a first flag. But a second flag is look at the author. If they don't have an author profile, and if you can't find them on social media,
Right.
they don't want you to. So, really be wary of that in the world that we live in today. I mean, my books have even ended up on some of those big, like overseas versions of my books, not books I
Right.
make money from, but versions of my books completely like lifted on some of those big overseas, like mega retailers. So there's a lot to kind of to take in the world, but no AI. I do something. I will say how I write books. So sometimes I do traditionally, like I sit with my journal and write books, or I type, sit at the computer clacking away. But the other thing I do is I record myself in Zoom. I have Zooms by myself.
Really?
And then I take yeah, I do, because I'm a talker. I'm a super Gemini. I love to talk. I don't mind talking to myself. So I started doing this quite a few years ago. I used to just do it on my phone or whatever, or even back in the days when I worked in academia. I would just take one of those old little digital things and I would just record. And once I record what I have to say,
Of course. Yeah.
then I can write it down. Or nowadays, of course, you can generate a transcript.
Yeah.
But
very
yeah, I
useful.
write books by talk. I talk the books to life in many ways. I don't know. How do you
Yeah.
write books? You wrote that great book on Elvis. How do you write books? Are you a typer at the keyboard?
Yeah. I just sat down and I let it come to me. But I use AI, like, is there an example of Elvis doing this concert? Make sure I get some citations. I want the that kind of stuff. Yeah, AI is great. Or, check the
Definitely.
spelling of this paragraph. Is there any for that, AI is awesome. It helps a lot.
It definitely can be helpful.
Mhm. But not for forging. So as we get towards the end, maybe tell the audience some of the rituals that they can have once they delve into your book. I, of course, like, the 42 negative sins. That's one of my all-time favorite rituals or traditions. But what else can they find? Because you have everything, not just working with Hecate, but how Hecate can help working with spirits, ancestors, animal guides. I mean, you've got the whole thing covered.
Yeah, I love the negative confessions too, and that's definitely like a favorite over the years. It's the first time I've shared it outside of the coven, the online coven that I've been running for many years. So we love the negative confessions. Thank you, Mott, for that. In the ancient Egypt, there's other rituals. There's rituals if they want to do Hecate's supper, which comes from ancient classical Greece as well, about preparing her a meal. There's rituals around that. There's self-initiation, if anyone is interested, a commitment ritual. There's a lot of meditations and journeys for connecting with spirits and so on. I wanted to bring a book into the world that was like my personal book of shadows, that was eclectic. It had a little bit of everything, and that you can kind of pick and choose what you're interested in based on where you're at in your own journey. Like, it's not the Keeping Her Keys book is much more like a course where you follow it through in stages. But this book, called the Cauldron book, is much more go in with where you're at. It's a great book for even bibliomancy, you know, that you just kind of open it and let the book tell you what you should be doing. So that's
It's got it all, people. And I also like, as we get to the end, this really struck out to me. You write that in witchcraft, modern witchcraft, emotions are typically the compelling force flowing through all witchcraft. Why did you decide to write that? I think it makes sense. But is there an issue with people not wanting to deny their emotions, or?
I think I was trying to just help people kind of drill down past, like, I need to pay this bill, or I'm really attracted to this person and I want to, you know, get closer to them, or I need this job. Like, I, you know, wanted people to be like, how can we go deeper? And the inspiration for that was a collection of fragments that are usually called the Greek magical papyri, where Hekate and all the goddesses are just, these are just wonderful. I love them. They're quirky. Their ancient magic was wild compared to today. They did all kinds of things that I'm just like, wow, you know, get the blood of 2 goats and, you know, the wing of this bird. And I'm like, that's crazy. I'm not gonna do it, but I'm like, I love the creativity. But in that book, in that collection, I should say, you know, they're often like almost like curses, like, or they're, you know, they want to like curse someone who's betrayed them, or they want, and I'm like, what is this all about? And also like those ancient curse tablets. I'm like, what are people like, what was this all about? And then I was like, oh, it's because they like needed an emotional release valve. And if you're doing a spell of attraction, like such as in the PGM, it's like, yeah, it's because you have all these emotions for this person. You know, so it's like you're doing these things. You might have like intentions or goals or whatever in your ritual or spell, but underneath of it, it's like we desire to feel a certain way. We don't want anxiety. We want reciprocated love. You know, we want to feel desired. We want not to be stressed out about money. Like, you know, like, so I just think thinking about the underlying emotions is a way to kind of deepen any practice.
No, it makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Well, awesome. Well, we are at the end. Graham, any last question or remark before we sign off?
Just that it's been a very enjoyable and very enlightening, and I hope I managed to avoid getting turned into an animal.
There are worse things. Worst things that could happen. So awesome. Well, thanks for that, Graham, and being here. And Cyndi, I have your website and your book linked on the show notes. It'll be on all show notes, audio, podcasts on YouTube. But anywhere else you want to send people at this moment in time?
No, if
or
they're
announcement?
if they're interested in anything I'm up to, go to keepingyourkeys.com.
That's it, simple, and you'll find all the avenues and so forth. Well, awesome. Well, everybody, it was a great conversation discussing Cyndi's entering Hecate's Cauldron. Check it out to find new dimensions of your praxis and new dimensions of the goddess. And yeah, that's it. Cyndi, thank you very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your work, your time, and everything you're doing.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Likewise. And for everybody else, take care. More shows coming later this week and next week. And in the meantime, keep working on your shadow and keep going to the crossroads. I'll see you there. Bye.